Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you hear us well. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Mirjana Vojtal. I work at the CFA Society Switzerland as the project and conference manager, and am together with Oli Müller and Florian Esterer involved in the organization of the CFA Institute Research Challenge here in Switzerland and Liechtenstein. Before we start with presentations, I would like to share a few technical details with you. We are recording this call, and the recording will be available to those who couldn't join us today, but also to you if you would like to see it, hear it again. And to assure a good quality of the call, at the background, you have to unmute yourself, but we kindly ask you not to do it. If you have any questions during presentations, you can type them in the chat session. And we allowed some time for Q&A session at the very end of the call. There you will have the opportunity to ask questions, and to do so, you will need to raise your hand, and our moderator will call your name and unmute you, so you will be able to ask a question. You can raise your hand, if you are on the phone, you can raise your hand under the tab More, and if you're joining us via computer, then you can raise your hand under the tab Participants. Back to the content now. The reason we are organizing the call today is to give you, and especially those of you who joined us recently, a short introduction on the subject company, u-blox, to give you an overview and background on the research challenge competition itself, then to tell you what is expected from you in the role of a mentor, and to share with you some guidances and some best mentoring practices. We have with us today Michael Futh. He's an analyst at Vontobel, and he will kindly give us a background on u-blox. We have Oli Müller, who is our university relations chair, who will talk about the competition itself, do's and don'ts of mentoring, about timelines. And at the very end, Tobias Kretinant, who is mentoring teams for 10 years now, will share his experiences with students and best mentoring practices. So with any further ado, I would like to give a word to Michael.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mirjana. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Mirjana said, I'm Michael Futh. I've covered the stock u-blox for many years at Vontobel. The purpose of this short presentation is to give you an introduction to u-blox and some hints and tips of things to look at or to look for when analyzing the company. So I'll start by giving, maybe you can put on the next slide. Yes, I'll start by giving a short overview of the company, followed by some relevant market trends and applications. I will then show you the technology roadmap and competitive landscape. And finally, I will point you to some of the aspects that I find important to look at when analyzing u-blox. Maybe just to make it clear, I'm not going to give you my opinion or my investment case here. This is not the purpose. I think every team should draw his own conclusions, come up with his own sort of research and investment case. So continuing to the next slide. If you can move it on, thank you. On the bottom, basically, you see a very simplified overview of what u-blox does. They make chips and modules for cellular short range and positioning applications. Cellular communication is basically things like 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G communications, so cellular network communication. Short range are typically things like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, and positioning is GPS, like positioning systems, so satellite-based positioning systems. The modules are pre-configured devices which are easy to integrate for customers into their systems, much easier to integrate than the chips themselves. The modules are, however, based on chips, so you will find the chips of u-blox and of other third-party suppliers in the modules of u-blox. So in essence, u-blox delivers wireless technology to locate and connect people and devices. It's a fabless company, so they do not have their own production. They produce together with partners, typically foundries like TSMC and other packaging companies. They were founded in 1997 as a spin-off of from the ETH in Zurich, with the original focus on GPS chips. The timeline you see there shows that the first GPS chip was launched in 2002, and only 7 years later, in 2009, they came up with the first cellular module, first Bluetooth module in 2014, and their own chipset in cellular. The first one was launched only in 2016. So they really come from the positioning, from the GPS market, and then have diversified or expanded into the other market segments. Company is led by CEO Thomas Seiler since 2002. IPO of the company on the Swiss Stock Exchange was in 2007. Some further facts on the right-hand side. I'm not going to go through everything, but around 1,000 employees, of which 67% in R&D. That's very high. That's typical, I would say, for a fabless company which has no own production. The other one that's important is 80% of the revenues are generated with about 100 customers. So even on that basis, you can see that the revenues per customer are pretty low, which requires a lot of customer support. And worldwide, they have 6,700 customers, so a huge tail of very small customers. Regionally, quite balanced in terms of the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific. And just to give you a number in terms of the units that they sell, around 30 million modules per year and 60 million chips per year. You can move to the next slide, where you see some of the main markets and applications. Three main application areas: industrial, consumer, and automotive. Industrial applications include things like asset tracking. So, for example, the tracking of containers on ships or point of sales terminals in shops. Fleet tracking, which can include taxi fleets. So you can locate all the taxis in your fleet or truck fleets across the country. Precision timing, that's very important for the synchronization of time in base stations for cellular networks. So mobile networks all have these antennas, and the time has to be synchronized, and that's done with GPS chips, so GPS or satellite time. Consumer applications include typically wearables, smartwatches. It's always difficult to know exactly in which device they are, but just, I mean, you obviously know what a smartwatch is, so Garmin, Fitbit, TomTom type of devices. People and pet tracking. Examples here are, for example, Alzheimer patients. You want to make sure that you know where they are. So you give them sort of a band with a positioning chip that can then transmit also the position. Or you want to track where your dog or cat is. Drones, another important consumer application. Here they're used, for example, GPS for the stabilization of the drones. Important market as well for u-blox. Automotive, there is in automotive the traditional application would be the navigation device inside the car that everybody knows by now based on GPS, but also things like emergency calls, that's automatically triggered emergency calls, and then in the future, or already now to some extent, autonomous vehicles which need a lot of communication between vehicles, that's V2V, or between the vehicle and the surrounding infrastructure in order to communicate basically the position and understand what's going on around the car. On the bottom left, you see the revenue split, approximately 60% industry, 30% auto, and 10% consumer, roughly. One important remark here is that they are not delivering to high volume applications such as smartphones. So no sales into smartphones by u-blox. They focus rather on more niche applications. The market trends on the top right, and I already said it, the devices are used to connect people and devices. So Internet of Things is the big buzzword here. And in that respect, the big trends are mobility, again here, smart vehicles, autonomous driving. We're still on the previous slide. And Industry 4.0, that's connected machineries. Typically, there's a lot of data that is produced by production machinery in factories. And all of that data can be used and analyzed to improve the production processes. Urbanization, things like smart grids, smart traffic, surveillance cameras, and then finally new health, connected consumers, whereby you would have watches. You know it maybe now from the Apple Watch, where some medical data can be sent directly to doctors. So these are sort of the key trends. If you look at the market potential, you will find in general that the market projections for IoT have, over the past few years varied quite wildly. Usually you find very, very large unit numbers. And to be honest, it's very difficult to translate those huge numbers into actual business opportunity. This is probably one of the most difficult things in coming up with a forecast for u-blox, is to assess how you can translate this this large opportunity into numbers. And I'm really curious to see what the teams will come up with. There can be quite large variations. On the next slide, you will see the technology roadmap and competition. I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible. On the top left, you have the technology roadmap for cellular. Here, the red line on top indicates the traditional mobile phone related cellular roadmap. You see 2G, 3G, 4G, and then 5G later on. These standards for mobile communication are generally with high bandwidth, meaning that there is a high amount of, or high volume of data which is being transmitted. And on the bottom, you see the blue line diverging, which is what is relevant for IoT, for Internet of Things, with low bandwidth. So you have low data volumes that are being transmitted, but of essence here is the low cost and the low power and the high latency. So different requirements for Internet of Things applications than for the mobile phone market. And you can see that there are a number of different standards over time which come in, Cat 1, Cat M1, and so on, 5G. And u-blox basically, or other chip makers have to develop chips and modules which respond to these standards, and those standards are evolving quite quickly. There are a lot of certification every time required, and so it's quite a challenge here for these chip makers to follow with those technology roadmaps. On the top right, you will see the competitive landscape, in particular for cellular here. You can see that both on the chip side and on the module side, you have quite a large number of competitors, of chip and module vendors, including some big names. And obviously, you can imagine that the huge numbers, the huge projections for the IoT market attract competition. And you can probably expect in coming years that there will also be consolidation here and eventually also strong price pressure. On the bottom left, you see the technology roadmap for positioning. Looks a bit weird, but in fact it's quite simple. u-blox comes out on a regular basis with a next generation of their positioning chips. Started obviously with u-blox 1 and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, etc. And every time a new platform is introduced, you will have, or a new chip, that will be normally smaller, lower power consumption, more precise, lower cost, and so on. This market is, I would say, probably much more mature than the cellular market. On the next slide, turning to the points that I find interesting to look at, you have in particular, starting on the top with sales growth. Here, you have to differentiate between volume growth trends and price trends. As I said before, this is probably very difficult to project and one of the most challenging parts of the analysis. Gross margin trends are important. They are reflective of pricing. They are also reflective of R&D intensity, because if you want to keep up your gross margins, you have to come up with improved features every time, and that takes a lot of R&D effort. Then the EBIT margin development, you can see on the bottom left chart as well. I've differentiated between adjusted and reported EBIT margin, up to everybody what he wants to adjust for, but you can see that there is quite some divergence between adjusted and reported numbers. So I think that's something that's important people look at. R&D intensity, the blue line, has increased over the years, showing also the necessity or u-blox's strategy to develop their own chips, and which costs a lot of money, and maybe more recently also the fact that the revenues have not grown in 2018, which leads obviously to a relative numbers a higher R&D intensity. Product development, how much do these product developments cost? How long do they take? These are interesting things to look at. How much do they sell of those products, and of which sort of product generation? Competitive environment and trends, I've already mentioned. You have to look at the number of competitors, you have to look at new entrants, trends there. And then cash flow development and value generation, that's the chart on the bottom right. You can see there quite a drop in 2017 and 18. So why is that going down? What has happened? I think that's important that the teams analyze that and look at those dynamics. And then on the top right side, another interesting one will be the guidance history versus actual results. I think this is reflective of visibility, so I think this is interesting to track. So that's something I would recommend people look at. You see in particular, just recently the company cut its guidance quite substantially. So this is, I think this is showing how challenging it is to predict the sales even for the company itself. And then they have the company has some midterm targets out for 2022, which imply nearly doubling of sales, a substantial margin uplift. And I think a key question here is whether u-blox can achieve that. If yes, why? And if no, why? And I think this is actually where the key of the investment case will be, and the argumentation of the different teams around that, I think, will be interesting to look at. So very interesting investment case, very challenging investment case, I think, and so it's I think it's an interesting choice for this challenge. And with that, I wish everybody good luck for this challenge.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your introduction to the mentors. This is extremely appreciated, as typically all the companies we choose are not that straightforward to analyze if you are not covering that industry. So thank you very much, Michael. I'm now going to cover the CFA Institute Research Challenge, right? So this is a pretty significant exercise globally. On this slide 5, you see the numbers of students, volunteers, countries, universities that are participating to this exercise. I have been involved over the last couple of years, and I can promise you this has grown quite substantially, and especially the local finals, the EMEA finals, and the global finals are quite big exercises and are quite prominent exercise from a franchise and visibility perspective. This is how it works on slide 6, right? You have 117 local challenges, right? This is more or less the number of countries participating, right? Those basically elect their local champion. The local champion attends the regional final. For us, it is the EMEA regional final, which next time will take place in Jordan, in the Dead Sea area. And this spring, thanks to Chris Dreyer, it took place in Zurich. That was quite a prominent happening as well. Last time we had one team from the University of Lausanne winning the Swiss local final and attending the regional championship. The winners from the regional championship, from the regional finals, basically attend the global final, which usually takes place in New York, early April, and there basically the best 5 teams out of 1,100 do compete against each other to basically emerge the best team from a financial analysis perspective. This is how it works. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, for agreeing to mentor a team, right? This is quite important for us. This is quite important for the industry, for our franchise, right? The teams are basically accompanied by a faculty advisor. This is a nice name from CFA Institute in Switzerland. Typically, this is the professor. This is a professor who is embedding the CFA Institute Research Challenge into a lecture, and they also get credits for that. And the industry mentor is you, right? So you are gladly giving them insight and guidance, right? The effort is limited to 6 hours of maximum, right? That can be face-to-face or virtual, right? Zoom or Skype, you name them, right? And in the assignment, which we'll talk later on, we try to match the geographical preferences as much as we could. You can help them to develop questions to the company management, right? They will be sending to you the first draft of the research report. And then, of course, they will also consult you when working on the presentation, which they have to hand in February. The research report has a quite fixed format, and on this slide you see the format requirements. We don't expect you to know those in detail, just for you to be aware that we ask the students, or CFA Institute asks the students, to submit the research report in that specific format, which is consistent globally and will basically allow consistent grading and consistent treatment of all research report on an EMEA and global level perspective. The students have basically 2 deliveries. They have the research report. They have to hand in by early January, right? On this slide, you see the grading matrix, or the scoring matrix for the research report. So it's about the business description. It is about the industry overview and competitive positioning. And this is the reason why we were particularly delighted to have Michael. Then we have investment summary, valuation, financial analysis, investment risk, and since a few years, also corporate governance. This is just a raw, basically gives also a raw guidance how much effort students should spend into the various topics. So for instance, if they spend 80% of their time on corporate governance, this is probably not the best allocation of time I could imagine. The second delivery is basically the presentation. They have to hand in by mid-February and do and hold in front of the jury board on the 20th of February 2020. Here is the scoring criteria for the presentation. It's financial analysis, right? The analysis of the drivers, the valuation work, the presentation, right? Questions and answer. Then, of course, the team involvement, did everybody participate in the presentation, and of course, the quality of the slide. Important to note is that the research report and the presentation are two completely different things, right? The research report will be graded, right, on a completely independent basis, and those grades won't be shared by the judges. And in an extreme case, right, even the target price and the recommendation might deviate simply because they submit the research report by early January, and they have to submit the presentation by mid-February. Important to know, dear graders, is that the presentation is not just a copy-paste of a research report into a PowerPoint format. It's really about developing a storyline, telling a story, and basically convincing investors to buy into the stock, like in real life as a sell-side analyst. This year we decided to work or to invest more time in presentation skills of students, right? So what we will be doing is we will take the finalist team of the 8 universities, so the best team per university, and we will basically invite them to a presentation bootcamp, right? Mirjana and I are organizing that one with a professional trainer, right? Karen Cody, she's a professional trainer in presentation and speaking, right? And she will be conducting that training for us and for the students at the end of January. No action point for you, but just for you to be aware that they will be brushed up in terms of presentation skills, which I think is pretty good. This is the company, right? Nothing more to say about it, just to let you know that students are not allowed to contact the company on their own outside of the organized sessions. We will have 2 organized sessions. The kickoff tomorrow afternoon, where we'll be having Mr. Roland Youth, CFO, presenting, and we'll do a conf call at the end of November. Outside of that, they are not allowed to contact the company as per CFA rules, and simply from a resource perspective, otherwise Mr. Yu would probably need to hire something like 100 investor relations officer for the 4th quarter of this year. Now speaking about the participating teams, and here a couple of introductory remarks, right? It varies a lot by year, and it is still varying as we speak right now. So students are still registering. We are waiting the final teams, right? And the number of teams are quite varying in a sense that it can be plus minus 100%. For instance, Lausanne, and I'm sure there are also some people from Lausanne listening to us, they are having so far only 8 teams, right? While last year they had a stunning 15 teams. So this is the preliminary assignment of teams, right? To the mentors, right? We will send an email to all teams tomorrow and basically confirm that, right? Those mentors who don't see their name here, right? That will be adapted next week when we see the details of the different universities and how much teams they finally have. Students are operating, and I'm a lecturer at the University of Zurich as well. Students are quite short, operating quite short notice, right? They started the winter term on the 16th of September, and they basically just came back to university and they still have registered for the course. So more information on that to come, and please apologize for any kind of variations there. Moving to the timeline, right? For you to be aware, right? The 26th of September will be the kickoff. There will be some, there has been some pre-event marketing, and there will be also be some post-event marketing by Mirjana the next day, right? The teams should basically contact you within the next 10 days, and we will be asking the teams to confirm that to us. On the 26th of November, we will have a conference call with uBlocks, and we will be asking the teams to submit questions in advance just to educate them a little bit. And they should not be afraid to ask a question the company might not be able or not be willing to answer to. Then for those universities that have more than one team, right? This is typically the case for Zurich, for Neuchâtel, for Lausanne, and for Lugano. They will do their intra-university competitions in December, because by January 1st, right, there is only one team per university basically preparing for the final. On the 6th of January, midnight, right, they have to submit a research report in 2 copies, right, in this predefined format. 2 copies means 1 anonymous without any names, bracket open, not even in the footer, bracket closed, right? And 1 with their names. The anonymous one will be used for grading purposes in order to ensure total fairness and total objectivity. 27th and 28th of January will be the presentation bootcamp. Then we will be asking them to show you the presentation, or the first draft of the presentation, early February. And then on February, you see it on this slide, we will have the Swiss local final. And on the evening on 20th of February, the local champion of Switzerland will be known. We have been working on mentors and graders, etc., over the last couple of years, and we thought it was wise to put together a bit of do's and don'ts, both from a mentee perspective, i.e. student team perspective, and also from a mentor perspective, right? So on the do's, right, please support the teams in applying the relevant contexts, right? And not everything they learned at university. You know, students tend to put everything into a research report they somewhere learned at university, right? Instead of taking the relevant things. Example is on the metrics, right? When students don't know which valuation metrics to use, valuation multiples to use, they take all of them they learned at university and then basically just weigh them, and you see some strange kind of tables with 10 different metrics which don't make sense, but they learned all of them at university. Consistency is something that is very important. Fil rouge, right? What I'm always telling them is that consistency is sometimes even more important than the content, right? Storyline is important both in the report and in the presentation, right? Please let them know if you feel they have weaknesses, right? And also encourage their strengths, right? Please challenge them, and please don't be afraid to give them quite honest feedback. Please don't accept inconsistencies and any kind of form of lousy work, and not be too authoritative. This is what we will basically tell the students. So they should take the ownership, right? They should contact you. They should schedule the meeting. They should basically keep you informed about the progress, right? They should involve you several times, right? We tried to do the matching as best as we could in terms of geographical preferences, right? If in some cases it doesn't work, right? We ask them to set up new communication methods, right? We ask them to use all the 6 hours they can have, right? And on the don'ts, right, we really wrote down the things that we felt did not work at all over the last couple of years, right? Very important, Florian, Mirjana, and I, over the last couple of years, felt that the mentor is a key determining factor for being a successful team. That's really important, and we will emphasize that tomorrow at the presentation as well. With that, I would like to conclude my comments, and I would like to invite Tobias Kretner. Tobias Kretner, CFA charter holders, has been working with us for the last 10 years in various roles, and I'm very pleased to have him now sharing his experience as a very experienced mentor. Tobias, thank you very much for all your help over the last couple of years. The floor/the microphone is for you.
So first of all, I would like to ask you not to take this mentoring relationship lightly. It may sound like a simple assignment, but it is not. And for those who have done or not done it before, you should understand that a good mentoring requires time and commitment. On the other hand, you will see, or maybe you already know if you have already mentored before, that mentoring is one of the most challenging, but also one of the most valuable professional relationship that you can enter into. And if you had benefited from mentorship before, you know what I mean. These people are often the most enthusiastic about passing them the gift along. Mentees, you will notice they will look up to you, they will see that some filling your role in the future, and probably or hopefully they will also become a mentor someday. So our role as a mentor is really to empower our mentees to develop their own strength, personal attributes, in order to help them find gratification in their work, which is ultimately the report and the presentation that they have to deliver. And today I would like to share with you a few anecdotes and hopefully give you some useful practical tips along the way. First of all, on the overall structure, I would advise you to have your mentees very early in the challenge draw up a roadmap of the challenge based on what you receive now as a presentation and the guidelines and everything, which is very helpful. And define together with them, even if they already know that, but really define with them the milestones, the key milestones, and encourage them along the way to stay on track. It's very easy for them to get lost. They have other things to do. They have maybe other exams or whatever. So you really have to encourage them to stay on track. I can't say to force them, because in the end, you can do the best coaching in your life, but you have to remember that it is ultimately their decision to choose to be successful or not. This is also something they need to realize, and it should be clarified very early in the challenge, right at the beginning, to avoid any frustration later. So really make them understand that you're willing to help them succeed by investing your time and sharing your knowledge, but in return you really expect dedication and seriousness about the challenge. So like we said before, no lousy work, etc. It's always useful to determine the format, the time, the length of each meeting that we will have with them, to clearly define, in order not to waste time, what they need to prepare and when they have to deliver it. Now to the report. Like we've heard before, the mentees, they usually like to jump to conclusion after having read 1 or 2 lines about the company on Google or Wikipedia. And I would definitely advise you that right at the beginning, during your first meeting, you make sure that they start at the beginning in order to avoid wasting too much time. Meaning thoroughly understand the company, the sector, the competitors, everything, until they reach a good general overview and understanding about the topic and the environment and everything. One of the main phrases I heard so many times, and I think mentees, they love this quote, is "the management says." Maybe because it's the easy way, but they like, or they love to believe whatever is written or said by the management. So there again, very early on, try to challenge them to come up with their own scenarios. What could happen if the management is actually wrong, misleading investors, or not anticipating key negative factors, and so on. Because most of the time they rely on what the management says and stick to that. Again, I would advise you to make sure that they know as much as possible about the company, and its environment before they start modeling anything. Otherwise, you will just end up wasting everybody's time. About the balance sheet, which is one of the key aspects of the challenge. Here also, like you said before, that's where the mentees will be the strongest. The balance sheet analysis, ratios, straight off the textbooks, fresh and clear in their minds. But in most cases, the real life interpretation of the figures will be lacking. In my experience, our mentoring job is not to tell them how to calculate the ratios or analyze the balance sheet. They'll know all about that. But it's really to help them interpret, understand, and see through the numbers. Of course, you can always guide them with what figure to use, what kind of analysis to run, and so forth. But again, they will have all the figures, they will have plenty of spreadsheets and even more, but it might become a bit overwhelming to them once they have to go a step further. So if they surely have the academic financial knowledge, they will definitely lack our many years of experience in spotting the important details, the little things that make something sounds too good to be true, the important footnotes or the positive hints that something might indeed augur well for the company, all these little things that we've learned by experience. So here again, they will totally rely on our mentorship for that. What we did, for example, in my teams many times, and which helps a lot, is a debate session early in the process. It's kind of a mock trial with the different proposed scenarios, during which every team members try to challenge the scenarios, playing the devil's advocate, with the mentor helping by asking the right questions. And this is usually very helpful early in the process to arrive to consensus and decide with which scenario they want to go ahead as a team. Now to the presentation, and that is definitely the mentee's weakest front and has been for all the years I've been mentoring teams. You will definitely meet mentees in different stages of the professional development, different culture, different personalities. That's really interesting about the challenge. And in that respect, there is only really two major advices I'd like to pass you on today. First of all, make sure that all the team members are on track with the overall strategy of the team. So in case of one student drops out, and it happened in the past, another one can step in rapidly. Students like to divide the work and say, okay, you do this, you do this, you do this, and they just do their part and don't care about the rest. And it happened in some situation that a student dropped out, got sick, or had an accident, and then the entire team was just lost. So make sure that all the team is on track during the entire challenge. Second, and this is to my opinion the most important advice today, try to organize, or not try, but do organize mock presentations. Over the past 10 years, I've experienced convincing loudmouth, really leading the pack during the entire preparation and totally collapsing in front of the jury at the presentation day. Or introverted person, never say the word during the team meetings, ending up really impressing the jury with eloquent and professional presentation. So without mock presentation, it would be very difficult, even for the mentees themselves, to know who can and will perform well and who will not during the actual presentation. So my advice is really to gather an audience, either colleagues or have them gather one, friends, family, or the students, and ask them to rehearse their presentation again and again every week until it flows smoothly. You don't have to attend, of course, all of these mock trials, but they should really do it. And I think it's excellent that CFA Institute organizes this presentation skills training in January. Also include the Q&A session at the end of the mock presentation. This is key. It will be key to anticipate the jury's questions and fine-tune the presentation slides accordingly. The mock presentations will also give you a better idea of who the real speakers of the group are, and who maybe should stay a little bit more in the back, not to bring down the entire team. And again, you could be surprised, but this is really the only way for the team to properly find out and define who will say what in front of the jury. Okay, so as I said, the mentees have really limited access to you. So it's very important that you respect the time and that you stay focused, that you give 100% of your undivided attention, and that you remember that the challenge is for them and not for you. So if you don't waste their time, they will not waste yours. Be a great listener, don't be a judge. Remember that they have never done something like that, and that for the great majority of them, they are really not experiencing that kind of framework. Finally, instead of answering their questions, try to ask questions rather than answering them. Let the mentees do the work of thoughts and come up to whatever conclusion they feel most comfortable with. In the end, if they decide to buy or sell, that's their opinion. It just had to be rock solid. Feedback is always easy to hear. Try to be critical, constructive, and just telling them that they're doing a great job or a poor one will not help. So one final word, we had in the past mentors who became really enthusiastic as the challenge evolves when it goes to semi-final and final and everything. And it's very good, it's very appreciated, but remember that you are not taking the challenge, so please let them write the report. It doesn't matter if you don't win or if your team doesn't win, but it's important that they really profit from this challenge. And beside all the good wisdom, I would say stay positive, passionate, and everything will be fine. Wish you good luck, and good luck to your teams.
Thank you, Tobias, for sharing your experiences with us. I think your advices are very useful for your colleagues. We are opening now for questions. If anybody has any question, please raise your hand or type it in the chat section. You can ask Michael or Oli or Tobias. Okay, Andrea, raised hand. Okay, Andrea, you can ask a question now.
Yeah, so for people that are not in the list of the mentor before, we should wait if there is other team adding during the week.
This is Oli speaking. Yes, right. This is still changing, right? Typically, there are one or two teams joining after the kickoff, right? And we apologize for all this fluctuation, as I said, students are quite short-term oriented, right? And they are just deciding in these days.
Okay, so if I don't see anything, I can consider that I'm not in this group, in this patch.
Properly with you in the next few days. And again, we have a lot of fluctuation, the number of teams, right? And we have people also in Lausanne here, right? The number of teams can vary by 100%, as we learned over the last. Yep.
Okay.
There are two questions from the chat. How is the presentation versus the report weighted for the final mark? That's from Rainer Ott.
Dear Rainer, thank you very much for your question. It's 50-50, right, for the Swiss final, right? 50-50, completely independent, right? For the EMEA, in the first round, it's also 50-50. In the EMEA final, it will be only the presentation. And of course, in the global challenge, of course, in New York, it is only the presentation.
Thank you. And from Spiros asks, can we share resources with our team? University is assigned to which?
Yes, you can, right? Yes, you can. They will have access to Reuters. They will have access to all the individual teams, tools they have from university. So no problems to share Bloomberg, FactSet, you name them with them. They only require, if they use the data, right, they should properly quote them and source them.
Very Very good. And a question from a certain JB. He's asking, could you please show again which team university is assigned to which mentor? Let me just go back to those slides.
We will send you these slides after the call or latest tomorrow.
I particularly like the team which is kicking ass sets.
Yes, and the respective mentor will probably also like it.
Any more questions? Okay. Okay, so if there are no more questions, we will share with you our contact details. So you can contact us at any time, Flo, Oliver, or me. And with this, we will close this call. And thank you once again for joining us today and for mentoring a group.
Thank you very much.
Have a great evening.